If you have ever underestimated someone because of their age, their clothes, or the quiet way they carry themselves, then listen carefully, because this is the kind of story that humbles pride and rewrites assumptions in a single afternoon. At 90 years old, Evelyn Carter moved slowly but with purpose as she stepped through the revolving glass doors of Grand Heritage Bank, a towering building of marble columns and mirrored walls in the heart of downtown Manhattan. The lobby was vast and echoing, sunlight pouring through high windows and catching the shine of polished floors so brightly it almost looked like water. Her shoes were sensible and slightly worn, her long gray coat neatly pressed but clearly decades old, and in her right hand she carried a wooden cane that had supported her through more than half a century of living. Every step she took was measured, not fragile, just careful, as though she respected the ground beneath her feet. She approached the main counter, where young professionals in tailored suits moved briskly behind glowing computer screens. "I'd like to check my account balance, please," she said in a calm, steady voice that carried the softness of age, but none of its weakness. A few heads turned. A young man in line glanced at her coat and smirked. Two women whispered to each other. In the center of the lobby, surrounded by subtle authority, stood Richard Coleman, the bank's president, a man in his early 50s with silver at his temples and a reputation for ruthless efficiency. His suit was charcoal, perfectly fitted, his watch expensive enough to pay for a year of someone's rent, and his confidence radiated in every clipped instruction he gave. He noticed the murmuring and followed the direction of everyone's gaze until it landed on Evelyn. He walked over slowly, more curious than concerned, but when he heard her simple request, something in his expression shifted into condescension. "Ma'am," he said loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, "this is a private financial institution. We handle high-value accounts. Perhaps you meant to visit a community branch?" The tone wasn't polite. It was sharp, almost amused. A few people laughed quietly. Evelyn did not flinch. She had been dismissed before. She had been overlooked, spoken over, and underestimated by men far louder than this one. Instead of arguing, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small navy blue card, its corners softened by time. She placed it gently on the counter. "I didn't ask for directions," she replied, meeting his eyes without hesitation. "I asked for my balance." Richard chuckled under his breath and turned slightly toward his assistant. "Lena, please verify that card. We've had issues with counterfeit accounts lately." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Security guards shifted subtly closer. Evelyn noticed, but remained still. She had grown up in an era where walking into certain buildings had required courage most people today could not imagine. This moment was nothing compared to what she had endured in her youth. As Lena hesitated, unsure how to proceed, Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter now but filled with something heavier than pride. "I remember when this bank didn't allow people who looked like me to walk through the front door," she said. "I used to enter through the side entrance after school to clean the executive offices. That was 1958. The laughter stopped. A few employees looked uncomfortable. Richard's smile tightened. "I'm sure you have many stories, ma'am, but your father had a scar on his left hand," Evelyn interrupted gently. "He burned it on a radiator when he was a boy. He used to rub it when he was nervous. I dusted his desk every evening." Silence fell so abruptly, it felt physical. That detail was not public knowledge. Richard's face drained slightly of color. Before he could respond, the elevator doors at the far end of the lobby opened, and the bank's chief operating officer, Daniel Harper, stepped out. Daniel was in his late 40s, composed and thoughtful, and unlike Richard, he noticed people before he judged them. He paused when he saw the scene unfolding and walked directly toward Evelyn. The moment his eyes met hers, recognition dawned. "Mrs. Carter?" he said softly, almost disbelieving. "Is that really you?" A ripple of confusion spread through the crowd. Evelyn smiled, and for the first time warmth softened her stern features. "Hello, Daniel." You've grown into your potential. Daniel turned to Richard, his voice suddenly firm. She was my mathematics teacher in public school. She's the reason I received a scholarship to college. I wouldn't be standing here without her. The weight of that statement settled heavily across the marble floor. Richard glanced between them, clearly recalculating the situation. Lena, hands slightly trembling now, entered the account information from the Navy card into the system. The screen blinked, processed, and then displayed a series of numbers that made her inhale sharply. She looked at Daniel first, then at Evelyn. "Would you like the balance printed or read aloud?" she asked carefully. Evelyn straightened slightly, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned lobby. "Please read it aloud. Transparency matters." Lena swallowed and began reading figures that climbed steadily into the millions. Tied to an educational foundation Evelyn had quietly built over decades. It wasn't personal luxury money. It was structured, purposeful capital dedicated to scholarships, mentorship programs, and literacy initiatives. The whispers returned, but this time they weren't mocking. They were ashamed. Richard stepped back, his authority diminished by his own assumptions. Daniel addressed the room calmly but firmly. Grand Heritage Bank values all of its clients. Respect is not conditional. The message was unmistakable. Within weeks, an internal review was conducted. Policies regarding customer treatment were rewritten. Diversity and inclusion training became mandatory, not as a public relations gesture, but as a structural shift. Richard quietly resigned under pressure from the board. 6 months later, Evelyn Carter returned to the same lobby, but this time, she wasn't holding a cane alone. She was escorted by board members who greeted her with visible respect. She had accepted an invitation to join the advisory board, becoming the first black woman in the bank's history to do so. She did not join to enjoy prestige. She joined to direct funding toward underserved communities and ensure that no young person with potential would be dismissed because of appearances. When she spoke at her first board meeting, her message was simple. Wealth is not what sits in your account. It is what moves through your hands into someone else's future. The employees who had once whispered now listened. Daniel often said later that the most important audit the bank ever faced was not financial, but moral, and it had been delivered by a 90-year-old woman who simply asked to see her balance. Evelyn continued visiting the bank occasionally, not for show, not for validation, but to review scholarship distributions and meet interns funded by her foundation. She greeted the security guards by name. She thanked the tellers. She carried herself the same way she always had, steady and unshaken. The marble floors still shined, the chandeliers still glittered, but something fundamental had changed in that building. Respect had replaced arrogance. Listening had replaced assumption. And every time a new employee asked about the portrait of Evelyn Carter that now hung near the boardroom entrance, someone would tell a story of the day she walked in quietly and reminded an entire institution that dignity cannot be measured by clothing age or volume. If this story reminded you that true power often arrives without noise, take a moment right now to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. Because we share stories that challenge assumptions and prove that integrity always outlasts arrogance.